Welcome to Nightmares Incorporated, where our goal is to make your sleep anything but restful. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, entitled Eyes at the Window. May 3rd. The eyes appeared at my window again last night. My analyst recommended that I begin keeping a journal to track these nightmares as we work through the process, as she calls it. A psychologist seeing a therapist would likely make for an interesting situational comedy, I suppose. But given recent events, I decided that seeking outside help was necessary. To be honest, I'm not even sure where to begin. Carol says that I should start with where my issues began, that she believes that I haven't grieved Marie properly, that I bottled up my emotions, and that's the cause for my insomnia and the night terrors I've been experiencing. Burke, she said, when Marie passed, you threw yourself into your work thinking that that was a healthy way to deal with your grief. In reality, all you did was ignore it, and that's why it's coming out sideways now. Sage enough advice that I've probably given myself on occasion, but I couldn't help but be angry with her at the time. Haven't grieved properly? Ignored it? I grieved Marie for over 2 years. I grieved her from the day she was diagnosed. Stage 3 lung cancer, although she never smoked a day in her life. The doctors at the time said that while there was still time to treat it, the odds were not in her favor. For 2 years, I tried to cling to hope. I told myself that optimism was at least something that I could do for Marie, that it might shield her from the crushing reality we both knew was looming. I immersed myself in research, in treatment options, in second opinions and clinical trials, anything to prove to her that we still had a chance. I smiled when I wanted to cry. I made jokes about the hospital food, even as her appetite waned and her energy dwindled. I promised her that this was just a bump in the road, even when I carried the weight of feeling guilty that I didn't believe my own words. Every reassurance I gave her felt like a performance, a desperate attempt to buy us more time, even if only emotionally. But deep down, I didn't believe she would survive. The odds were too stark, the prognosis too grim. Every time she tried to talk about the possibility of things not going our way, I would shut the conversation down, refusing to entertain the thought. "Don't say that," I would tell her, as if my words had the power to change her trajectory. I couldn't bear to admit the truth, not to her, not to myself. Instead, I buried those feelings beneath layers of denial and fear, packing them into some dark corner of my mind where I thought I could keep them safely hidden. Each of her attempts to confront the reality of her condition felt like a crack in my armor, one I couldn't afford to let widen. What I didn't realize at the time was that those feelings weren't hidden at all. They seeped out in ways I couldn't control. I became tired, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually even. My energy was spent on keeping up the facade, and there was nothing left for her or anyone else. Resentment grew, though I hated myself for feeling it. I resented the cancer, resented the doctors who delivered the bad news, resented the inevitability of it all. But most of all, I resented the helplessness, the gnawing realization that no amount of effort could rewrite the ending of this story. The more I pushed these thoughts away, the heavier they seemed to become, like an invisible weight pressing harder against me each day. The worse things got, the more I withdrew. I convinced myself it was self-preservation, but it was nothing more than avoidance. The endless hospital visits, the nights spent by her side trying to keep her spirits up. It all became a blur, a repetitive cycle that left me questioning my strength. I was there, physically, but emotionally I had locked myself away. And now, after all this time, I wonder whether she noticed. Whether she felt that growing distance, even as I held her hand and whispered reassurances. Whether she saw through my attempts to shield her from the truth and felt the unbearable weight of it anyway. I often ask myself whether I could have done more, been better, been stronger for her in those final moments. And those questions haunt me as much as my memories. By the time the end came, I felt like I was fresh out of grief. But I was wrong. The worst of it came after. I felt as if I had failed her. When I buried her, I felt as though a part of me went too. So when Carol suggested that I had not properly grieved, I blew up at her a little, saying everything that I've written down here, plus a few expletives. I told her how when Marie was in hospice that we'd get a weekly visit from the local chaplain. How even though I knew he was only trying to help in the way he knew how, I couldn't help but feel like he was trying to convert Marie while she was dying, and me while I was emotionally unstable. I felt like he was taking advantage of the situation. So I yelled at him to get out. Told him that cancer is the best argument against the idea of intelligent design. Because while I'm not an engineer, I think if I had noticed such a massive flaw in something I created, I would have gone back to the drawing board. So either there is no God, or he's fucking incompetent. Showing great composure, the pastor apologized for angering me and left the room. Carol asked me if I thought that was an appropriate response. I said that it felt appropriate at the time. When she asked if I ever considered that Marie may have wanted to speak with the pastor, I had nothing to say in response. I hadn't considered it. In many ways, by the end, I treated Marie's illness as my own. I didn't see that at the time, but I do now. I had been selfish. I was weak. After Marie's passing, I buried myself in work, desperately clinging to the structure and demands of my profession as though they might shield me from the unrelenting ache of loss. The constant influx of patients provided a temporary distraction, allowing me to lose myself in their stories rather than confront my own. For a while, it seemed to serve its purpose. I was always busy, always moving forward, or so I thought. Grief, however, has a way of infiltrating the cracks, no matter how tightly you try to seal them. Slowly but surely, it seeped into my professional life, coloring my perceptions and reactions in ways I couldn't control. At first, the changes were subtle. I found myself growing impatient with my patients, their problems beginning to feel trivial against the immense weight of my own suffering. What had once been a deep well of empathy within me seemed to dry up, replaced by a kind of irritability and detachment. I became short-tempered, dismissive, even somewhat reckless in dispensing advice. The advice I gave was often questionable, more reflective of my inner turmoil than what might truly benefit the patients. I told myself it was a phase, that I would find my footing again, but the cracks only deepened. The tipping point came when one of my patients, a young man battling severe depression, ended his own life. He had been struggling for years, and though I wasn't directly responsible, the investigation that followed concluded that, I couldn't shake the gnawing belief that my negligence had played a role. He had come to me for help, and instead, I had failed him. The guilt was overwhelming, a tidal wave crashing against the fragile dam I had built to contain my sorrow. It was no longer just grief. It was regret, shame, and a haunting sense of accountability. My nights then became a battleground for my subconscious. I was plagued by dreams that felt less like dreams and more like accusations. Eyes stared at me through the darkness, unblinking and relentless, as if the universe itself was demanding an explanation for my failure. These eyes, vivid and piercing, seemed to follow me even after I woke, their presence lingering in the corners of my mind. I began waking up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and the oppressive weight of guilt hanging over me like a storm cloud. I began to dread the nights as much as the days, knowing I would find no solace in either. The combination of my patient's death, my deteriorating ability to function at work, and the haunting nightly visions made it clear that something had to give. I was sliding into a downward spiral, and I feared it might end in the same place as my patient's tragic journey. Reluctantly, I took a leave of absence, a decision that felt both necessary and humiliating. Admitting I needed professional help was an act of surrender I had resisted for far too long, but it was the only way I could see forward. Therapy has not been the quick fix I had secretly hoped for. It is a slow, grueling process, accompanied by uncomfortable introspection. For the first time, I have been forced to confront the depths of my grief, its roots, its branches, and the way it is intertwined with every aspect of my life. Carol thinks that's why I'm seeing the eyes. The first time it happened, I awoke with a start, the afterbirth of some nightmare my mind refused to remember clinging to me, my chest tight and my lungs gasping for air as though I'd been suffocating in my sleep. My room was steeped in darkness, but my attention was immediately drawn to the blinds of my bedroom window, as if something was commanding me to look. Behind them, faintly illuminated by the street light outside, I saw a pair of eyes, glinting, motionless, and unnervingly human. They were watching me, unblinking and fixed, as if daring me to move. I screamed, a guttural, panicked sound that seemed to reverberate within the hollow silence of my room. My trembling hand fumbled the switch on the light, bathing the room in an artificial glow that did little to dispel the terror coursing through me. Without thinking, without even considering the consequences, I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, adrenaline propelling me forward. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to quell my fear. I scanned outside the building, the street, the shadows surrounding my apartment, every nook and cranny where someone might have been hiding. There was no one there. Nothing but the stillness of the night and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. My heart thundered against my ribs as I stood there, exposed and vulnerable, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to reveal only emptiness. I convinced myself that it must have been a figment of my imagination, a lingering echo of my guilt-fueled nightmares. But the reassurance was short-lived. The following night, the eyes returned. This time they felt closer, as though the blinds did little to shield me from their penetrating gaze. I didn't scream this time. Instead, I froze, paralyzed by the oppressive certainty that no matter how many lights I turned on, how many steps I took outside, or how fervently I searched, I wouldn't find their owner. I knew that for a fact, because on that second night, I took a good long look at those eyes. There was no mistake that they were Marie's. I told Carol about it the third time it happened, and that's when she suggested I keep this journal. That she believes I'm having nightmares about seeing Marie looking in at me because of unprocessed guilt and grief. When I asked her about medications, as I was positive that I was awake when I was seeing them, she suggested that we wait. that a few bad dreams do not equal regular hallucinations. That's enough for today, though. It's late, and I'm tired. I'll get back to this in a couple days, or after my next appointment. Because while Carol said she would not read the contents of my journal unless I gave her permission, she did say she would check it each visit to make sure that I'm doing my homework. May 7th. I don't see Carol for a couple more days, but wanted to write this down while it was still fresh in my mind. If these are dreams that I'm having, they're far more lucid than any I've ever had in my life. I want to try and get the details down so I don't forget. While I've never put much stock in dreams, I do recognize the fact that quite often they are our subconscious working things out while we sleep. That while they may seem chaotic and jumbled, there can be some genuine truths learned from them. In my dream, the eyes were back at my window, staring at me with the same unwavering intensity they had shown the previous nights. But this time there was something more. A sound, soft at first, began to emerge from the stillness. It was a tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, like fingernails brushing against the glass. My breath seemed to catch in my throat as I watched the eyes. They never changed, never blinked. Then came the murmuring. It was low and guttural, barely audible through the barrier of the window. Yet it clawed its way into my consciousness with eerie clarity. Straining to catch the words, I realized it sounded like Marie. Her voice was fragmented and strained, as if speaking through layers of earth and decay. Cautiously, I got out of bed, trying to remind myself that this was just a dream, an incredibly lucid dream, but a dream all the same. The eyes shifted slightly, tracking me as I got out of bed. I approached the window slowly, watching for any sign of movement from the other side of the glass. Finally, when I stood no more than a foot away, I thought I could make out what Marie's voice was saying. "I'm cold," she was murmuring, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "It's so cold in the ground." That's when the dream shifted so suddenly that it felt like it gave me whiplash. In an instant, I was no longer in my room. I was seeing inside of her coffin, the suffocating darkness pressing against me as her screams tore through the silence. Her body, rotting and motionless, suddenly jolted to life, her mouth stretching wide in a soundless cry that echoed in my mind long after the vision faded. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heartbeat racing as if I had been running for miles. Even now, hours later, the memory of her voice and her scream refused to leave me. It's 6 a.m. now. It was 3 when I woke up. The idea of going back to sleep was laughable after that nightmare. So I brewed some coffee and sat in my brightly lit kitchen, the window shades drawn. And it wasn't the nightmare that caused me to stay awake. It's the fact that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I closed the blinds in my room before I went to bed. Yet when I woke up, they were open, the same as they had been in my dream. I'll have to tell Carol about this, as it might be an indication that I've started sleepwalking. May 9th. I met with Carol this morning, and while I didn't blow up on her again, it was close. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to relive the worst 2 years of my life. I've already lived through it, so the thought of living through it again seems unbearable at times. I don't want to remember watching her waste away, her hair falling out, her cheekbones becoming more pronounced, her body being eaten alive from the inside by a traitorous cell. I don't want to remember my own impotence, my own helplessness. How when it came to this person that I vowed to love and protect, I could do nothing but bear grim witness to the inevitable. I told Carol that I envy people of faith rather than yelling at her again. How when it comes to people of faith, they at least have the comforting myth of a better place that our loved ones go to when they die. That they can believe that that person lives on in some form. But I could never believe that. Even as a child, it didn't make sense to me. I have always seen death as nothing more than oblivion. The consciousness simply fading out, like the flame of a candle that has burned down and exhausted all its wax. I don't have a pleasant fantasy about where Marie went after death. I only have the brutal truth that she's just gone. Carol listened patiently. She's a great therapist, which is why I chose her. The fact that I've known her since college aided in my selection when choosing her. I knew that I couldn't sit down with a stranger and air these thoughts. I knew that I needed someone I could trust, someone who was familiar with me. Once I said my piece, Carol postulated that perhaps the words I heard in my dream, combined with the eyes I see in my window, is my subconscious trying to tell me that I haven't let go of Marie. That part of me feels guilty for her passing. Let go. Such a strange phrase in my opinion. Always has been. If Marie had left me, I could let her go. But she didn't leave me. She died. She was 45 years old and she died. Letting go feels like a betrayal. I would personally prefer to see her with another man 1,000,000 times over, rather than know that she is gone, her light snuffed out forever. I didn't say any of this to Carol. Instead, I told her that she might have a point, and that I would consider her advice. I just wanted to get out of there. I wanted to lapse into talking about my sleep habits and my sleepwalking. When it came to that, Carol advised that I start a regular routine before bed and put a piece of tape over my blinds so I will know for certain that I did indeed open them while I was sleeping, rather than only thinking that I had closed them. 15 minutes later, time was up, and I was granted my much-desired release. The drive back to my apartment felt heavy, as though the quiet hum of the engine amplified the weight of my thoughts. Every mile seemed to stretch into eternity, a solitude that gave my mind too much room to wander. I parked in the lot, staring at the building for a moment before mustering the will to climb the stairs to my front door. The apartment greeted me with its usual starkness, a space devoid of warmth, stripped of any remnants that might remind me of Marie. After her passing, I made the decision to sell the house we had shared. It wasn't just a structure. It was a vessel for her memory, and the life we had been building together. Every corner held echoes of her laughter. Every creak seemed to whisper her absence. Staying there felt like drowning in grief. Tonight, the apartment was no different, a hollow container for my thoughts. I forced myself to prepare a light dinner. The taste was irrelevant. My appetite has long been a stranger. As I scraped the last forkful from the plate, the silence pressed against me, a suffocating reminder of my loneliness. Seeking temporary relief, I turned to the bottle. The first glass brought a quiet numbness, dulling the sharp edges of sorrow. The second smoothed the jagged memories that clawed at my mind. By the third, the haze was thick enough to blur the ache, offering me the closest thing to peace I can find these days. As the night grew darker, sleep began to call, though I hesitated, lingering between the pull of rest and the fear of facing my dreams. Carol's advice echoed in my mind, a tether to reality, however fragile it felt. With deliberate care and perhaps a hint of determination born from the alcohol's influence, I closed the blinds and pressed the thin piece of tape firmly over them. The adhesive met my fingertips with a reassuring resistance, a small yet tangible act of control. It wasn't much, but it felt like a promise. Of answers, of clarity, of something solid when morning arrived. The bed awaits me. Its embrace will be neither warm nor cold, but merely functional. I will pick this up tomorrow, curious about what possible revelations morning might bring. May 10th. The dream began as the others did, with me waking up and immediately glancing at my window. The blinds were down, fooling me into the false sense of security that I was actually awake. I got out of bed, meaning to fetch a glass of water, and froze in my doorway. There was a silhouette standing in the hallway, lightly illuminated by the oven light in the kitchen, but not enough to see any details, other than the eyes. Defying all logic, as dreams so often do, I could clearly see Marie's blue eyes staring back at me from the shadow. I stood immobile for an unknown amount of time, staring at the shadow as it stared at me. I was at a loss for what to do. I wondered if I should approach it. It was my dream, after all, so maybe confrontation was what I needed. But I couldn't, because there was the sneaking suspicion that maybe I wasn't asleep. What if I approached that shadow and found that it was solid? What if I discovered as I drew closer that there were no details to discern, that the shadow and the eyes were all that was there? What if I touched it? Or worse, what if it touched me? As if to force the situation, the shadow suddenly took a step in my direction, the floorboards creaking beneath its feet as if signaling that it was actually there. I let out a pathetic little cry and backed away into my room. The shadow took another step. I backed up, closed the door, my breathing coming in ragged little gasps. I watched the doorknob intently, waiting for it to turn. I didn't know what I would do if it did. Jump out the window, most likely. As if to indicate to me that that would be a bad idea, a light tapping came from the window on my left side, and along with the tapping, the quiet murmurings. I turned, almost against my will, and looked at the window. The eyes were there, piercing and judgmental. Without warning, the eyes moved closer to the window. I retreated from them until the backs of my legs bumped into my bed as the eyes did not stop. They phased through the glass, through the blinds, and Marie's face came into view, twisted with hatred and pain.
"You let me die!"
She roared at me in a voice that was nothing like the one I remembered.
"You left me to rot. I'm rotting in the cold, hard ground as the insects and vermin feed upon my flesh."
Her voice devolved into an inhuman roar, and I added my own screams to the cacophony. I awoke lying on the floor in my hallway. The breeze that I felt upon my legs motivated me to get up in a rush. When I went back into my room, I saw with dumbstruck horror that the blinds had been pulled completely down, and the window was wide open. I'm not exactly ashamed to admit that I am currently writing this entry from a hotel room that I plan on staying in for a couple of days. While I'm positive that what's going on with me is a product of my own mind and restless sleep, I needed a break from the apartment. Perhaps a change of scenery will have a calming effect on my frazzled mind. I've been sleeping, at least I think I have been, but I'm constantly tired, as if what sleep I'm getting is not restful. I'm hoping that I can at least get a good night's rest in these unfamiliar surroundings. May 12th. I was wrong. My decision to escape the confines of my apartment and retreat to a hotel was meant to grant me peace, a reprieve from the oppressive weight of my sleepless nights. Yet I have come to realize that some horrors cannot be outrun, even by changing scenery. The night before last was restless, filled with fragmented dreams that left me disoriented. But last night was an ordeal far darker. A night that will likely haunt me for years to come. It started out innocuously enough. After brushing my teeth and taking a shower, I stepped out of the bathroom, preparing to go to bed. My heart lurched as I opened the bathroom door. The lights were off in the room beyond. I was certain I had left them on as a small comfort against the creeping shadows that seemed to follow me everywhere these past days. The sudden darkness enveloped me, and the faint hum of the city beyond the window seemed distant, almost muted. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a form perched upon the edge of my bed. It wasn't just a dim outline of furniture or a trick of the light. It was unmistakably a figure. The shadow sat slouched, its head bowed low, and long dark strands of hair hung like a curtain over its face. My breath hitched, each intake sharp and shallow, as I stood frozen in the doorway. The air seemed heavier, thicker, as though the room itself was alive and pressing inward. Slowly, with movements that felt agonizingly deliberate, the figure began to straighten. Its head lifted just enough to turn toward me, and though its face remained obscured in the gloom, I felt an unrelenting sense of malice radiating from it. Pure instinct drove me back into the bathroom. Logic and reason abandoned me entirely. I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. My legs, weak from fear, carried me to the cold porcelain tub, where I huddled like a frightened animal. I tried to steady my breathing, but every sound, the distant creak of the walls, the murmur of water in the pipes, felt like an impending threat. The suffocating silence outside the bathroom door was worse than any noise. It was as if the figure was waiting, biding its time, mocking my feeble attempts at escape. Morning felt like salvation when it finally arrived, though it was a hollow reprieve. I cautiously opened the bathroom door, afraid that the shadowy presence might still linger. Instead, I found the room empty, the bed askew, as if someone, or something, had been sitting there. I'm growing desperate. My mind feels as though it's unraveling thread by thread, and I question my every thought and perception. Are these just dreams? Or am I truly losing my grip on reality? The hotel, which had seemed like an escape, now feels like a trap. I am beginning to wonder if returning to the apartment would be for the best. At least there, the darkness is one that I know. I called Carol's office, asked for an emergency appointment after a brief description of what's been happening over the last few days. They got me in for tomorrow afternoon. May 16th. Carol listened intently as I recounted my recent experiences, her face a mask of professional concern. She carefully questioned me about my symptoms, asking for specifics about the nightmares, my sleeplessness, and the unsettling visions that seemed to blur the line between dreams and reality. After a thoughtful pause, she suggested a prescription for Xanax, explaining that it might help regulate my sleep and alleviate the night terrors. Her tone was reassuring but measured, emphasizing that this was just a step in addressing my struggles, not a cure-all. Though hesitant, I agreed. Anything seemed worth trying at this point. To my relief, the pills have been a small beacon of hope. The last few days, though far from perfect, have felt like the first real break in the storm. I've caught glimpses of who I used to be, someone not perpetually haunted by unseen horrors. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, I've managed to sleep without awakening in a cold sweat, clutching at reality as nightmares twisted my perceptions in the dark. The nights still feel uneasy, filled with faint shadows that seem to linger in the corners of my mind, but they've been quieter, less hostile. I wake up feeling a little more rested, a little more grounded, even though the memory of what I've endured still clings to me like a faint residue. Even so, I tread carefully, wary of the fragility of this newfound peace. It's as if I'm walking along a thin sheet of ice, uncertain when it might crack beneath me and plunge me back into chaos. I've started making small adjustments, leaving more lights on, keeping the television on a low hum for comfort, things to ward off the oppressive silence that once felt suffocating. But for now, I take solace in these small victories, no matter how fleeting they may seem. They feel like stepping stones, leading me, cautiously, toward recovery. With the nightmares handled, I'm hopeful that I can continue the process of working through my issues with Carol. She's confident that once I do, the nightmares should cease on their own. For now, I'm just thankful for the reprieve. May 21st. The reprieve was short-lived. The nightmares have returned with a vengeance, clawing their way back into my nights as though they had only been lying in wait, silently gathering strength. Last night, I found myself trapped in the most harrowing vision yet. A dream so suffocatingly vivid, it felt more real than my waking life, leaving me shaken long after I woke. In the dream, I was buried alive. The air was thick and stale, weighted with the oppressive scent of moldy wood that surrounded me. A coffin enclosing me in its unyielding embrace. I could hear the faint creak of the wood under the weight of the soil above, and every breath felt like a struggle against the darkness pressing in from every side. My lungs screamed for air as the coffin walls seemed to shrink, suffocating me in their relentless grasp. The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that makes your pulse roar in your ears. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, a primal instinct to survive overpowering every rational thought. I fought with every ounce of strength I could muster, kicking, thrashing, screaming into the void, pounding my fists until splinters bit into my skin. The wood groaned under the onslaught of my desperation, until finally, it gave way with a sickening crack. A sudden rush of cold, gritty soil filled my mouth and nostrils as I crawled my way upward, driven only by sheer desperation. The weight of the earth bore down on me, crushing and unyielding, as though the world itself was intent on keeping me buried. My fingers tore through the dirt, nails breaking and peeling back, but I refused to stop. Every inch felt like an eternity, my progress measured by the agonizing burn in my muscles and the suffocating heaviness of the soil. But every movement, I hoped, prayed that I was heading toward the surface, toward the promise of air, of light, of escape. When I finally broke through, gasping and shaking, the sensation of fresh air on my skin felt like salvation itself. Yet salvation was fleeting. When I saw my own hand emerge into the dimly lit cemetery light, I noticed the decay. Skin peeled back from my struggle through the dirt, veins visible, a greenish-black colorization to what skin still remained. I was a living corpse. When I screamed, my voice sounded like a garbled woofling sound, as if my vocal cords had decayed already. My scream jolted me awake, the sound still ringing in my ears as I sat upright in bed, heart pounding like a drum. My throat felt raw and hoarse, as if I had been screaming for hours. The darkness around me felt heavy with an unfamiliar stillness. For a moment, I thought it was over, just another nightmare, albeit one that was a little worse than the rest. But then I heard a faint scuffling sound coming from the living room. Panic began clawing its way back into my chest. Cautiously, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cold floor grounding me as I steadied my trembling hands. The sound came again, louder this time, a dragging noise, like something heavy scraping against the floorboards. I grabbed the closest thing I could find for protection, a lamp from the nightstand, its cord trailing behind me as I crept toward the source of the noise. Each step required every ounce of willpower I contained. My own pulse, the only sound accompanying me down the hall. When I reached the doorway to the living room, I froze. The scene before me was unrecognizable. Furniture lay overturned, shards of shattered glass glinting in the pale moonlight filtering through the window. The air reeked of decay, a putrid stench that turned my stomach and made my skin prickle with unease. And then I saw her. She stood in the center of the living room, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, the dim light dragging long shadows across her decayed features. Her eyes, clouded and lifeless, fixed on me with a chilling intensity that pinned me in place. Marie, if this thing could even be called Marie anymore. Her skin hung in loose, discolored patches, clinging to her frame like rotted parchment. Her mouth hung open in a grotesque semblance of a smile. She emitted a piercing shriek that reverberated through the room, cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. And then she moved. With a jerky, uneven gait, she began to shamble towards me, her arms outstretched as if reaching for something, reaching for me. The sound of her voice, or whatever was left of it, echoed in the hollow space, mangling my name into something guttural and unrecognizable. Her utterance was not pleading, nor was it comforting. It was a demand, raw and primal, dragging every ounce of fear I had buried deep within me to the surface.
Back! You left me in the ground, the cold, dark ground. You abandoned me, you bastard. Into the ground you will go, into the dark, into the rot.
I stumbled backward, my grip tightening around the lamp as she advanced. My mind raced, grappling with the impossibility of what I was seeing. This was Marie, the woman who had been everything to me. Yet what stood before me was an abomination, a cruel distortion of her form, her essence. Panic surged as I backed into the wall, my movements frantic, my breath shallow. Something shifted. My vision blurred as darkness crept around the edges. The next thing I knew, I was lying flat on the cold, hard floor. Splinters bit into my skin, and I could feel dust settling on my face. The faint, acrid smell of decay hanging thick in the air for a moment longer. My heart pounded against my ribcage like a hammer as I scrambled to sit up, the disarray of the room crashing over me like a wave. Furniture lay scattered in pieces. Jagged glass glittered ominously, and the walls contained several fist-sized holes. But there was no sign of Marie. I was alone in the room. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I just want it to be over. May 22nd. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel I'm trapped in a never-ending nightmare. My ability to tell the difference between when I'm awake and when I'm asleep has diminished. I don't even know how to tell Carol about the mess I made in my living room. The broken chair, the smashed television, the busted coffee table, the holes in the walls. My knuckles are a wreck, so I know that I did it. But how could the pain or the noise not have woken me up? I spent the day fixing what I could and trashing the rest. Have I lost my mind? Is this what a psychotic break feels like? I don't know. After all, crazy people don't know they're crazy, right? I just want a way out of this. But the only option I can see is unthinkable. I don't know how to escape this prison I'm in, because the prison is apparently my own mind. May 27th. The last few days have been strangely better. It feels as though the pressure that had been building in my mind has dissipated. The improvement seemed to begin with another dream, a vividly haunting yet oddly comforting dream that has lingered with me, refusing to fade. In it, I found myself wandering through a desolate world, a place where the sky was a canvas of ash, and the air tasted like sorrow itself. All around me there were gravestones, stretching endlessly in every direction, their inscriptions blurred and unreadable, as if the memories of the dead were fading into obscurity. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of my own footsteps crunching on the brittle ground. It was a world built entirely on death. My despair grew heavier with each step, the silence pressing against me like the hand of something immense and uncaring. I felt consumed by it, as though I were nothing more than another stone awaiting its engraving, my existence insignificant and forgotten. But then, in the suffocating quiet, there she was, Marie. She appeared as though untouched by the decay around us, vibrant and alive, her presence radiating warmth against the cold desolation. Her hair shone like sunlight, breaking through heavy clouds, and her eyes held a kindness I hadn't seen in what felt like years. Despite the overwhelming barrenness of the world, her smile was soft, yet it carried a weight of understanding, as though she knew the torment I had been grappling with. She spoke to me, her voice a balm to my frayed mind, calm and steady. "If you wish, you can join me." I didn't understand at first. Join her? I looked around and noticed that I was again in my apartment, a staircase materializing in the floor of my living room. It was strange, but most things in dreams are. They were normal enough looking stairs, if not oddly placed, leading down into a darkness that seemed almost solid. There was a pull, an inexplicable urge to step forward, to descend into something I couldn't yet comprehend, but somehow longed for. Marie was then next to me. "It's dark," I said as she took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "Only from up here," she said, her voice familiar but different somehow. "Once you go down, you'll find whatever you wish at the bottom." "This is a dream," I said flatly. "Yes," Marie answered. "How do I join you?" I asked, my voice hesitant, the offer overwhelmingly appealing. Do I held up 2 fingers of my free hand, miming a gun, and pointed it at my own head.
No, silly,
she said, laughing, her lilting voice making me briefly forget everything that had happened up till now.
You only have to walk down the stairs with me. That's all,
Marie said. I woke up with tears streaming down my face, but for once they weren't from pain or confusion. They were from something else entirely. Something I couldn't yet name. Relief, perhaps, or a fleeting sense of release. I spent the morning staring at the spot in my living room where the staircase had appeared in my dream. The light streaming into the room seemed almost foreign after the dream's somber tones. There was nothing there, of course. No staircase, no sign of Marie. Just the faint hum of my own breathing, the stubborn ache in my chest, and the quiet creak of the apartment around me. Maybe the dream was a sign, or maybe it was just my mind's way of telling me I'm not as far gone as I thought. Either way, I can't stop thinking about that staircase. Where would it have led if I had taken the first step? Would I have found peace, or answers, or perhaps something I'm too afraid to imagine? Would I die if I went down that staircase? Or is it a metaphor for completely breaking from reality? Would I be found in a vegetative state, my mind gone, existing only in some fantasy land I had constructed in my own madness? And if that was the case, would it even matter? Would I care? It was Marie, not some horrific vision come to plague me, but my beautiful Marie. I could feel her skin, smell her hair. She was as real to me as she had ever been. Although my mind tells me that it was just a fantasy, as dangerous and terrible as the ones that have frightened me over the last few weeks, a part of me doesn't care. I miss her so much. Beyond the dream, things have been better. I haven't had any further night terrors, and haven't dreamed of the staircase again. Maybe my hesitation to go down, to retreat so far into my own mind that I disappeared, had a therapeutic effect on me. Maybe that dream was me achieving some form of closure. Perhaps the combination of therapy and medication has finally freed me from the worst of it. Had a good appointment with Carol this week. She said she was proud of me for how much better I seemed. Perhaps I've made it through the worst of it, and I'm now on the path of healing. June 9th. My illusion of peace and closure came crashing down 5 days ago. All beginning with a nightmare that was unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. I awoke in the complete darkness of my room. My nerves immediately on edge as I could almost hear imperceptible whispering. My eyes, adjusting to the dim ambient light spilling through the window, caught something that froze me in place. Dozens of eyes, bright and unblinking, stared back at me through the glass, each pair filled with dark, unknowable intent. They didn't seem human. Too predatory, too alien, but all the same blue color as Marie's. I tried to move, to escape the oppressive gaze that not only looked at me, but through me. I leapt out of bed, but when I turned toward the door, my horror deepened. The floor of the hallway cracked and buckled under the weight of unnatural hands. Hundreds sprouting like grotesque flowers from the wood itself. The fingers clawed and stretched as though reaching for something unseen, their movements causing the floorboards to groan under the strain. It was as if the apartment itself had finally turned against me. That is not the worst of it, however. The nightmare was just a prelude to what was to come. In the days that followed, an unsettling realization began to take hold. My nightmares were no longer confined to the hours of sleep. They began leaking into my waking life. Shadows would move in the corners of my vision, their shapes reminiscent of those haunting forms from my dreams. The sound of cracking wood echoed in my mind when silence fell, and I felt phantom fingers touching my skin, as if those crawling hands had crossed the boundary of reality. I find myself inexplicably trapped between two realms, the lines between dreams and waking blurring more with each passing moment. While therapy and medication had given me hope that I might escape the labyrinth of my mind, this latest ordeal has made me question whether true freedom was ever possible. I no longer know what is real. I'm afraid to sleep, but even more afraid to stay awake. Even as I write this, there are eyes staring at me from the walls. When I turn to face them, they close, leaving only the normal white paint that is normally there. I can hear Marie whispering to me, but her voice is too low to make out any words, and there is something deeper, more guttural underneath. I can't confess any of this to Carol. Seeking therapy was embarrassing enough, but to confess that I believe I've completely lost my mind? I can't. My career would be over. I'd be just another patient in the hospital, kept stable by a cocktail of medications that keep me tentatively tethered to reality. I can't accept that. I fucking won't. And that's why I'm going to try and summon the staircase. I'm not sure if I'm awake right now, but I have a few sleeping pills. I'll take them. That way I know I'm truly asleep. As I fade, I'll think of Marie. Maybe that will be enough to summon her to my dreams, where I can accept her offer to go down those stairs. I no longer care what waits at the bottom of them. I need to escape this nightmare that my life has become. Whether that escape comes in the form of death or psychosis matters little to me. Her voice is growing louder, along with the other one. She is screaming while it is laughing. I can't do this anymore. I just want to sleep. I just want to be with her. June 10th. I awoke from the best sleep I've had in ages. For a little while, I simply lay in the soft bed in which I found myself, luxuriating in the feel of weight in my limbs, rubbing my fingers together to feel the skin and the friction, exhilarated by the feeling of the cold floor against my bare feet. It's been so long since I had a body, but I am picky in who I choose as a host. Unlike those despicable little rage monsters who overpower their victims, resulting in a constant struggle for control, I take a subtler approach. I've never known what they believe they will accomplish through brute force, maybe taking a couple of lives, along with that of their host. To what end? They usually only produce a slobbering, cussing, jittering thing, the human constantly fighting against them. They're as strong as we are when it comes right down to it. They've just convinced themselves that they're not. You must first break them down until the only place they want to be is anywhere other than their own mind. You torment and then offer an escape. That way, you can simply slip them on, as if they're a well-worn coat. It is elegant work, not just simple-minded barbarism. But that is why I, and those like me, are far more valuable to my master. I see the bigger picture. Station and profession are what I look for, being fully aware that with the right host, my reach can go far. I believe that I will start with Carol. While he has not seen the way she looks at him, I have. I think a torrid, shameful love affair would be a fine way to break in this new body. I will subject her to humiliations and violations that I will not write about here, not yet at least. I will leave her damaged and emotionally broken, and she will speak not a word of it, out of fear for how it would affect her profession, or her friends' and family's opinion of her. She will bear her pain in silence, as so many of them do. I will then move on to his patients. The thought of all those damaged minds who trust him completely honestly makes me shiver with anticipation. The things I will get them to do with only well-chosen words. And boy, does he have some interesting patients. I've been reading through some of his files, and that was when I saw this journal. Of course, I had seen him scribbling in it while I was breaking him down, but it meant little to me then. Now, however, after reading through it, I've decided I will continue it. I will write down my exploits here. Everything I will do to Carol, everything I will do to his patients, and everything I will get them to do to others. That way the good doctor can see what I've been up to with his body when he wakes up. And you will wake up, Doctor. I don't kill my hosts. There's no fun in that. No, you will exist in the most sublime of dreams I have made for you while I am wearing your body like a costume. You and your poor dead wife will exist in utter bliss while I am spreading death and madness through your patients. You will go on ocean cruises and to theme parks, wherever the fuck you wish. Go to Paris and make love to your imaginary wife like you were in your 20s again. It will be complete ecstasy, complete happiness, until she begins to rot before your very eyes. Until her skin begins to dry and shrivel, turning brown and black. Her lips will pull back, revealing her rotted teeth and gums. The scent of decay will seep from her every pore. And she will be wholly unaware that any of this is happening. She will not know why you are suddenly afraid of her, disgusted by her. And when I feel that you're on the brink of madness, I'll wake you up. I believe I'll have you sitting in the chair I'm in right now. This journal open to this very page. That way you can read what you've been up to while you've been away. Every lurid detail will be recorded so that you will be fully aware of what I have done. You will find that your own life has improved leaps and bounds while I've been in control, that your practice will be flourishing, and that you will have made new and powerful connections. You will find that I was far better at being you than you were. And that's where my fun comes in. All the rest, the web of death and defilement that I will create from all those that I influence, the hundreds that will be harmed by the dozens that I corrupt, all of that is just business, a part of the job. But seeing what you do when you realize not only how long you've been asleep, but what I have done in your place, that is my source of pleasure. Will you accept this better life I have made for you? Ignore all of the collateral damage? Forgive yourself for what you will likely still believe to be a psychotic break. Maybe you'll even adopt a couple of my methods, finding that you enjoy the life I will have built for you. Maybe you'll go mad, end up in a padded cell, one in which I will of course send you constant visions of your rotting wife. Or perhaps you'll just use the .357 Magnum that I will have purchased between now and then, and finish the job once and for all. Whatever you choose to do doesn't matter to me. The fun will be watching what you choose to do. Because regardless of how the rest of your life plays out, I will have left a stain upon your soul. A stain that will act as a beacon. So that whenever you finally do free yourself from this weak, disgusting mound of bones and flesh, my master will be there to greet you. And I will be there to welcome you as a brother. I look forward to formally meeting you, Dr. Burke. But until then, I've got work to do. Thank you for joining us here at Nightmares Incorporated, and we look forward to seeing you next time when we bring you another original story. Until then, sweet dreams.